Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
If I get the feeling you've been cheated.
It is Wednesday, June 7th, 2023. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, independent journalist Erin Reed, author of the Erin in the Morning newsletter on Substack, on keeping track of all the anti-trans legislation across the country. Then Joshua Landis, head of the Center for Middle East Studies at the University of Oklahoma, on the Arab League normalization of relations with Syria. Also on the program today, air quality alerts across most of the northern U.S. from those Canadian wildfires. In addition to D.C., feds are now using a grand jury in Florida in Trump's stolen document case. In a new report, Mark Meadows, Trump's former chief of staff, has testified in at least one of the federal Trump investigations. Federal judge finds Florida's ban on trans care for minors likely unconstitutional. A right-wing clique in Congress has rebelled against McCarthy to sink their own anti-gas stove regulation bill. Scientists find summer total ice melt in the Arctic Sea could come a decade sooner than previously thought. Chris Christie, Mike Pence, they make it official. They all climb into the clown car. The U.S. apparently knew that Ukraine was planning to blow up the Nord Stream pipeline. Chris Licht out at CNN, and Tucker out with his anti-Semitism on Twitter. The SEC sues Coinbase and Binance for security law violations. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It is Wednesday. Emma Vigeland not here to utter her trademark phrase, Hump Day, which again, I want to reiterate, she invented. But nevertheless, it is in fact Hump Day, regardless of whether she's here to say it. And I'll put a little, change in the bucket that we have here. The bucket.
Change. Yeah.
Well,
low rates.
No, I've just got a lot of change. Let's get right into it. We got a lot of stuff to go over today. Just to give you a sense of, in the aughts, and probably prior to this, it was basically taken as gospel by the classical economists that it was almost impossible. Like, you could not get under a 5% unemployment rate. Just couldn't do it. It was the natural unemployment rate. You couldn't get under that. That's what we were told. And now we're being told that the unemployment rate is a problem because it's so low based upon inflation, which it is now increasingly clear was a function of, well, let's play this clip But we know that inflation was a function of, at this point.
More and more people are saying, even the New York Times and Wall Street Journal are saying, like,
these lefties, that it was a function of, first, our logistics problems that we had following COVID. Also, massive profiteering, essentially, by corporations.
And logistics problem also mean middlemen get their beaks wet.
Yeah, I mean, people are going to make money when the things go sideways, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there has to be inflation. But logistics problems were problems, without a doubt. But then it just became essentially also a function of corporate profit taking, and to some extent, an increase in wages. We had 1 million less people in the workforce, maybe 500,000 less because they died. And then maybe some who took early retirement because out of COVID, they couldn't get back into work. And so wages increased to some extent. That added to it, but not very much, relatively speaking. I mean, I think about somewhere between 55, 60%, and 80% is a function of logistics and of corporate profit taking.
Right.
But this is the standard economist line on CNBC.
Sustained period.
What do you think the unemployment rate needs to look like in the United States to become, quote, stable?
I don't know. Look, if you want to get inflation to 2.0, I think you need an unemployment rate in the sixes.
In the sixes?
If you want to get to 2.0.
Okay, hold on. That is big. That's a massive shift from where we are today.
Right. I don't think we need to be at 2.0, though. I think if the Fed gets to 2.99.
Okay, but to get to 2.99, do we need to be at 4.5? Do we need to be at 4? What is it? What is that in your mind?
I would guess around 4.5 to 5, and these things are super hard to control.
And is that politically palatable?
And that's why we have central banks, is to make tough choices. They haven't, the inflation mandate helped our economy over a period of decades. The idea that we just sort of give up and say we're fine at 4.5% inflation.
I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just saying these, to me, underneath it, that's the fundamental issue, right?
Yeah.
Because what you need to do is cause massive, not massive, but on a relative basis, what would feel like massive unemployment.
The supply side way to do this without. It seems like
I'm sure you'd love to try tax cuts as a way to bring inflation
less
down.
regulation,
Which maybe you could find a Democrat and do big infrastructure spending. So you could do tax cuts, infrastructure spending.
All those things are inflationary.
That's just not how it. That's not how it works.
It's all and when you have higher interest rates, you can't start businesses. Entrepreneurs have a harder time providing the jobs that you need. You need more jobs, or more people to go in.
Sorry about that reverb on the clip, folks. But the bottom line is that this, first of all, I love the casualness in which he said, 4.5, 4, because really what we're talking about is 500,000 to 1 million people losing their jobs. Yeah. Just so when he's talking about half a point.
Well, we're at 3.7 now, and that's 6.1 million people unemployed.
And so the idea that, first off, and you like the way that he frames it here, because he's basically saying he knows that the Fed's target is 2%. So he says, well, you don't really have to get it to 2%. But he's speaking as if it is absolutely necessary to drive this unemployment number up to control inflation. Although the unemployment rate has not gone up and inflation has gone down. How is that possible? How is that possible? And we have yet to see corporate profits go down. How about you need to have corporate profits go down? And the way that you can do that, there's really two different ways. One is a windfall profits tax to stop the price gouging. And the other is price controls. Now, of course, the last time we had price controls in this country was by Richard Nixon, Republican president. None of that is even discussed whatsoever. I don't know if they've ever even said those words on that network. But because they want to make it seem like it's completely out of the realm of possibility. But if that's the issue, there are tools in your tools box that are sitting there, rusty, that have worked in the past. But they won't do that. It really is impressive. I think that guy is he from the Pete Peterson Foundation? Is he?
Furman?
Yeah.
He's a Harvard economist now. He was the former, I think, a CEA guy or Council for Economic Advisors guy for Obama. Just not sure exactly.
I don't think he's
NEC director at National Economic Council. Yep, Peterson Institute.
I don't know if that's the Pete Peterson one. Yeah, I imagine it probably was. Peterson, of course, was
non-resident senior fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics as well.
I don't know if that's the same place, but Pete Peterson was a huge fan of cutting Social Security.
Go figure.
Folks, new sponsor. This episode is brought to you by Zippix Nicotine Toothpicks. Zippix brings you a totally satisfying, convenient, and great tasting way to curb your nicotine cravings. Look, folks, it's time you put the cigarettes away. You stop filling your lungs with vape oils. You can get your nicotine fix. And you can also get your oral fix. Zippix toothpicks are easier, healthier, and a more discreet way to do that. They're available in 6 great flavors. They have options in 2 milligrams and 3 milligrams of nicotine. They come in these packages. This one is peppermint watermelon. They have all sorts of flavors, though, that are interesting. I haven't tried the nicotine ones. They have sweet wood. They have sweet whiskey, Spice Island, big whiskey, peppermint watermelon. Like I say here, I got that. And they also have, if you're not using it as a way of quitting smoking. And I will say that I don't know if people notice this, but toothpicks have been my thing since I stopped smoking a long time ago. And the Zippix also has these, you can buy these little cases. They also have
looks like a cigar.
Well, no, it is. I don't know if people notice I do this sometimes during the show, but certainly before the show, I have here, they have B12 and caffeine toothpicks. This one I think is the peppermint cinnamon, but they also have other flavors. They have the peppermint watermelon for the, they have the bourbon flavored. I haven't tried that one, but they have peppermint watermelon flavored as well for the the B12 caffeine ones. Zippix has already helped tens of thousands of customers leading a healthier lifestyle. And if you currently smoke or vape, they can probably help you too. Make your lungs happy and try Zippix nicotine toothpicks. It's time to quit. And this makes it obviously much easier. I find that the toothpick for me has always been to deal with my oral fixation. Ditch the cigarettes, ditch the vape. Get some nicotine-infused toothpicks at zippixtoothpicks.com today. Get 10% off your first order by using the code MAJORITY at checkout. Your lungs are going to be glad you did. Just a disclaimer, this product contains nicotine, which is an addictive chemical. You must be 21 or older to order. Zip more, smoke less. Zippix nicotine toothpicks. All right, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to be talking to Erin Reed, author of Erin in the Morning newsletter on Substack. Be right back after this. We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report. Joining us now, independent journalist Erin Reed, author of Erin in the Morning newsletter on Substack. And Erin, I got to tell you, I follow you on Twitter. I check out your Substack on a regular basis because folks in our chat, maybe close to a year, a little bit less than a year ago, 6-8 months ago, because following the 2022 election, my assumption was, based upon what happened in Michigan, that we were going to see a lot less attacks by the Republican Party on trans folk. And I was horribly mistaken. And it was quite clear from the work you've been doing, just what's been going on. And it's gotten a lot worse. Let's just start with, I've read in your Substack, 530 proposed. And it's just in the works. Give us a breakdown of just how many anti-trans pieces of legislation have passed just in the past year, it feels like, or since November.
So actually, 531, I think we're at today. I continually update this. And we have seen more bills that have been proposed this year than all of the rest of years of American history put together that target the LGBTQ and trans community. And it's a stunning surge of them. You're right in saying that looking at the election results in 2022, you would have thought that they would have pulled back, because in all of the states where they made this a central issue, they saw defeats. We saw Herschel Walker sit with Riley Gaines to talk about Leah Thomas in the closing week of the Georgia campaign. That failed. We saw in Michigan, they poured millions of dollars, and that failed. We saw in Arizona, very similar happened. In Wisconsin recently, the Supreme Court election. However, it would appear that they are more afraid of their right flank than they are of the general election wins and losses. Because if Republicans oppose gender affirming bans and things like that, they're going to get targeted by people like Matt Walsh, Charlie Kirk, etc. So of these bills, the 530 bills, you see bills that ban gender affirming care for transgender youth, but transgender adults as well in places like Missouri or Florida. You see bathroom bans that will throw transgender people into jail for a year just for being in the bathroom of their gender identity. You see bills that forcibly out trans kids in schools to their parents. You also see book bans where any books with LGBTQ characters are being pulled off of shelves. In Florida, for instance, we actually saw a teacher who was forced to resign because she played a Disney movie that had a gay character in it. And then lastly, we see drag bans. These are bans that essentially state that you cannot impersonate a male or female with exaggerated clothing or makeup in a public place or while reading a book or in any other number of scenarios. And, these are just a few, but there have been tons of new ways in which they've targeted the LGBTQ community and in specific transgender people in all of these bills.
I want to talk about the Florida legislation in particular, because there was just a court ruling, I guess, yesterday in regards to Florida. But before we get there, what happens? Like, what happens after they pass the suite of these? I mean, is there a state that has passed like the full, Monty of anti-trans legislation, or do they? And is it like, well, okay, we've banned gender affirming care for children, and then we ban gender affirming care for adults, and then we criminalize the idea of being in a bathroom of your own gender, et cetera, et cetera. Do they keep going? Like, what happens? Do they catch the car essentially, or do they keep searching for more?
I'm so glad that you're asking this question, because whenever you look at how this all happened, like how did we get to where we're at right now? And you think about 4 years ago, the main issue was trans people in sports. That was what people talked about. That was what the people on the right were talking about. And that was what they were pushing. We saw attack ads against Andy Bashir in Kentucky, for instance, focusing on trans people in sports. We now know from interviews with people like Terry Schilling at the American Principles Project and people at the Alliance Defending Freedom that the sports issue was literally just a wedge issue designed to encourage further passing of these laws. They knew that if you could get an asterisk on the gender of any trans person for at least one kind of law, let's just say sports, then it was easier to sell that asterisk on everything else. So yes, you're a woman, but asterisk, not in the case of sports, not in the case of getting your gender identity markers updated, not in the case of bathrooms, not in the case of legal protections. And they continue to expand this. And so what you saw is actually all of the states that passed these sports bans, the 18 states that passed sports bans over the first couple of years, 2020, 2021, all of those states are the same bills that now pass the gender affirming care bans, or the same states that pass the gender affirming care bans, as well as the states that are passing the forced outing provisions in schools. And once you catch the car, so to speak, there is no end to this. There's no bottom. Whenever you watch people that are in the thought leadership in the anti-trans movement, like Michael Knowles, stand in front of the Conservative Political Action Conference and state that he was aiming for eradication, this is what it looks like. That is the stated goal. And you look at people like Matt Walsh, who right now are talking about banning adult care as we speak, right at this moment. So yes, there is no bottom. They do continue to seek to push us literally as far as we will allow them to push.
And so do we have an example where they have gone to the maximalist position, or I mean, or is it wrong to say that there's a maximalist position? Like when you look at the these thought leaders, not just Walsh and Knowles, who are sort of like the troops behind this on some level, but when there is sort of new legislation that is being bandied around, or new concepts as to what they're going, what is the maximalist position?
Okay, so the place that I would focus on, if you're looking for what is the cutting edge of this, where are they passing the newest laws, where are they kind of experimenting around to find the newest policy that's going to be then emanated around the United States, and that is Florida. That is Ron DeSantis. That is where so much of this is coming from. Bernadette Broyles from the Child and Parental Rights Campaign wrote the Don't Say Gay bill in Florida. That bill then spread all over the United States. Gender affirming care bans were hatched up in part by organizations that were founded in Florida. And now we have seen this last year in Florida, bills that did not survive this year, that did not pass. But you can see, and the history of transgender bills in this country and LGBTQ bills in this country is the one extreme bill of this year is next year's mainstay, is next year's bill that's going to get passed in a bunch of states. And this was true in 2020, whenever we saw, all the sports bans, and Arkansas was like, let's maybe pass a gender affirming care ban. And then that emanated around the country. That was the extreme bill of that time. So the bills that are in Florida right now, we've got the bathroom ban, we've got the gender affirming care ban for trans youth and transgender adults as well. We've got Don't Say Gay bills that essentially ban sharing your pronouns in classrooms or updating your pronouns in classrooms. Bathroom bans, like the whole 9 yards, are in Florida. However, look at the bills that did not pass, because whenever you look at the bills that did not pass, what's going to be introduced all over the country next year. Here's one of them that didn't pass last year, but that came close. It was a bill that essentially opened up the way that libel and slander laws work. And it alarmed reporters everywhere, because it allowed government officials to sue reporters for slander or libel for quote unquote misstating their case on stuff. But there was another provision in that bill that stated that accusing somebody of homophobia, transphobia, racism, or sexism could be a slander of $30,000 penalty. And literally, you could not use there was a subheading there that stated that, because truth is a defense against libel and slander. However, in the subheading, it said you cannot use a person's religious beliefs or scientific beliefs to prove truth. And so what this is essentially stating is that if you accuse somebody of being transphobic, if you accuse somebody of being homophobic, then in Florida, that person can sue you if whatever you have accused them of is dispensed in Florida. That includes tweets. I constantly accuse people in Florida of passing transphobic legislation. And so, this didn't pass, but it did get through committee. It was heavily espoused. And this is something that we could see. Another thing that was hatched up in Florida was a bill that could potentially take kids from their parents, trans kids from their parents. If you travel in Florida and you have a trans kid, they can take your kid away. If you live in Florida, they could take your kid away. This was amended out of the bill that passed in Florida, and it was dramatically weakened. But this is something that we have seen a movement towards doing.
Let's talk about that federal judge. I mean, I want to get to shield laws and broaden this out too. But what did that federal judge say about this? Was the law that was passed, I guess, a month and a half ago or so?
Yeah.
And this is the gender affirming care for minors, but also had provisions that really inhibited particularly access to gender affirming care for adults.
Absolutely. So to give your viewers a little bit of a description on what this bill does, it bans gender affirming care for transgender youth under the age of 18 entirely. It also bans nurse practitioners from prescribing gender affirming care to trans adults. Now, remember, nurse practitioners actually provide 80% of all gender affirming care in the country, as well as a majority of care period in the country. Nurse practitioners are dramatically underappreciated in many ways. And then for the remaining 20% of transgender adults who do get their medication through doctors, it also bans that care until they sign an informed consent form that has not been released by the state government yet. This all should remind people of TRAP laws, targeted restrictions on abortion providers. These are laws that essentially do not ban abortion care, but put so many regulations around it that it makes it impossible to provide that care. Now, Judge Hinkle, a federal judge in Florida, just overturned a large portion of this law. The adult provisions are still there, but only because they weren't part of the challenge. Those will now very quickly get challenged. Now, what Judge Hinkle stated in his opposition, in his overruling of this law, blocking of this law, at least temporarily, is it was scathing, everything that he said in it. For instance, the state of Florida argued that the medical experts were biased and the medical organizations were biased. And the quote that Judge Hinkle said is if a pot ever called a kettle black, it is here. The statute and rules that were made were an exercise in politics and not good medicine. That's because the organizations that were responsible for this Florida law, they released a study that was commissioned by Florida, and it was supposed to be an independent study. Court documents showed that they literally drafted this study specifically to ban care before the study even happened. Their research was tailored and manipulated specifically to get to the point of banning care. Furthermore, we hear all of these statements about how there are all people that regret gender affirming care, detransitioners, etc. Florida literally could not produce a single person who regretted care as a witness that was willing to speak to Florida. If it is so common that people are detransitioning and that are regretting transition, you would think that they would be able to find a single person, but nobody was willing to do it. You know, it was a very interesting case. They used lawmakers' statements against them. For instance, on the stand, one of the lawmakers called transgender people mutants, demons, and imps, and that appeared in the court ruling. It's hard to argue that your bill is not discriminatory if you're literally calling the population that you're discriminating against mutants, demons, and imps. So the bill is now blocked right now.
And then I guess presumably that goes to that will be appealed by the state. Just off the top of my head, any circuit, including Florida, is probably not exactly a particularly. I would imagine will be a hostile one.
The 11th Circuit is absolutely a hostile circuit, not as hostile as the 5th Circuit, and there is a chance that at the very least this could stand for a little while because this is a temporary restraining order and it's not a decision on the merits. And so sometimes courts are a little bit less likely to overturn the TROs, but we could see that. We're going to see what happens on the appeal.
Okay, let's talk about shield laws. When you talk about 531 proposed laws, with I think at least 200 to 300 already passed in less than a year. It feels like. How many shield laws are we seeing, and what form do they take?
Okay, so we talked about all of these laws that target the trans community. So one of the issues that is coming up, and this is what this law addresses, is that if you are transgender or if you have trans youth and you leave Texas where they are investigating your care or the care of your youth, and you go to, let's say, Colorado to get your kids' care because Texas has now banned that care. What Texas could do, and this was the fear, and they have done this in before this law was passed, is they could then go to Colorado. They could say, hey, healthcare clinic in Colorado, I demand that you give me all of your documents as pertaining to a criminal case. I have that right as a state. I'm investigating conduct on one of my residents. And that healthcare clinic in Colorado might feel legally compelled to give up all of the medical records. Now, this is not just for trans care. This is also for all the states that are starting to ban going out of state for abortions, like Idaho. If somebody leaves Idaho and goes to Washington to get abortion, they come back, Idaho could say, I want to subpoena that abortion clinic in Washington. So what's going on? All of these states are now starting to pass laws that say, if you are trying to persecute our people that come to our state within our borders, we have jurisdiction over our borders. We can control what happens in our borders. Little healthcare clinic over there, you do not give up your medical records to Texas whenever they subpoena them. Furthermore, if you make it to our borders and Texas tries to charge you with a crime just because you came to get an abortion or you came to get gender affirming care, we will not extradite you. We're not going to send you back to Texas whenever Texas tries to charge you for getting care for your kids or getting care for an abortion patient. And this could become a major constitutional issue. Like this could become a major constitutional crisis because we have not seen, there's very little constitutional testing around fugitives leaving one state, quote unquote fugitives, to obtain care in another state and then being pulled back into their state. There's arguments about jurisdiction, full faith and credit clauses, et cetera. But we are at the point to where we have internally displaced refugees in the United States. I just spoke in Florida, in West Palm Beach, Florida, to a Pride festival there. And I spoke to many people right afterwards. And one of the most common things that I heard was, I'm the last one here. All my other friends have left. They've all gone because the care is being targeted and they're being banned.
Wow. Let's just more broadly, like what can people do to push back on this, particularly when we're talking about red states where they, despite the fact electorally it doesn't it doesn't have salience, at least in purple states, I guess. What can people do to push back on this?
So I would look towards history as a guide here. I often get asked, why now? Why is all this happening now? And it's important to point out that this is not the first time that the LGBTQ community has been targeted. This isn't even the first time that some of these laws have been used, like drag bans, for instance, in the 1950s and 60s. They raided gay clubs using drag bans. In the 1980s, we had to demand healthcare research. And in the early 2000s, we had the ex-gays and Exodus International that, was very similar to the detransitioners now. Every single other time in history that we have gotten through these tough times, the way that we did it was through turning to our local communities. We have survived and thrived in the margins by forming mutual aid groups that can give aid to each other whenever you need to get out of these states, to go to some of these safe states, to provide the care that you need in underground ways, to essentially take care of one another and look out for one another. And I think that the most important thing that people can do, regardless if you are in a red state or a blue state or a purple state, is to look for your local LGBT organizations. Give them support, because right now they are swamped. They're the ones that are challenging these laws. They're the ones that can give the resources to the people. They are the ones that can answer those questions of, where can I go? How can I get out of here? And they are doing that work. I see places like Equality Florida, Ohio Equality, Virginia, et cetera. These are places that are pushing a lot of local policies to protect people. Even in Missouri, where we have seen, a gender-affirming caravan pass in Missouri, Kansas City passed a city ordinance stating that they will not enforce that ban or any of its procedures within the city limits of Kansas City. And I think that we're going to see further action at the local level. A lot of the opposition has come at the local level. Moms for Liberty, a right-wing group that basically goes to all the school boards and causes trouble, saying that, Pride shouldn't happen or that we shouldn't have rainbows in schools. They show up for these school board hearings. And I think that finally people on the left are realizing that acting local is so important. Showing up to these school board meetings is important. Supporting your local organizations is important. And I think that that's how we move forward.
When we were talking about, when we hear these, Matt Walsh going on Joe Rogan saying that there are millions of kids who are taking, puberty blockers or getting gender affirming surgery. Well, give us a sense of what are the numbers? Now, of course, I don't take at face value that they're just interested in, protecting the children. There's absolutely no, and I don't take at face value that they have this type of investment in women's sports because they have not in any way exhibited that in the past. And, people can be sports fans and have a sense of what the PGA should do for whatever it is. I mean, but what are the numbers are we talking about? It seems to me a lot of times, these Republicans, these right wingers, the media talkers are trying to scare people about something that they just generally don't find scary, but also don't really come into contact with that much that it's in any way an issue in their daily lives.
Yeah. And so just recently, and I recently wrote a story about this, in Louisiana, the Louisiana Medicaid Office commissioned a report last year. They wanted to study how many people are actually getting care in the state. And they found that in the state of Louisiana, for instance, only 100 transgender youth got care in the state. Of those 100 transgender youth, there were 0 that got any form of surgery. The majority were puberty blockers and hormone therapy. puberty blockers, average age of start in that group was 13 or 14, and hormone therapy was 16, which this basically matches up with most of the anecdotal information that I've received, as well as some of the data that's been out there. They did study a National Insurance Agency report showing that the likely national numbers are estimated at 14,000 trans youth that have received puberty blocker or hormone therapy, and 5,000 that have received puberty blockers. Reason being is that most trans youth start on hormone therapy at like 16 because they couldn't get access to puberty blockers beforehand and have been forced to go through puberty. Of those people, of those trans youth, I have spoken to many parents groups. I've met these people at Pride festivals, at all of the events that I go to. I advocate for them. The vast majority of them seek enormous obstacles around their care. The stories that I hear are wait times of 1 to 2 years, of methodical processes where they have been seeking therapy, doctors, psychologists, etc. And they do this in consultation with their care team. And most of these families have huge care teams, and they have to, because with all of these laws that are targeting them right now, they have started to maintain records. And most trans families that I know of have binders of all of their all the diagnostic attempts, all of the things they went exhaustively in order to obtain their kids' care. And these families, they span from very Republican families to very Democratic families. The governor's own child in Montana is non-binary, is older than 18, but is non-binary. And so this doesn't, being gay, being trans, etc., it doesn't fall under one group or another. Like, there's no partisan lean to it. It is just a natural part of the human condition. And many people don't understand, what gender affirming care looks like and what caring for trans youth look like. But I think that many people do understand that the state is not in the best place to basically decide what that care is for the kid. And instead, the families working with their doctors can very much tailor the care to the individual's needs. And that was what happened in Florida. In Florida, we saw the ban was overturned in Florida. It was blocked in Florida specifically on a parental rights ground, saying that the state is not better at deciding the care for these kids than the families and their medical teams.
Has there been a case? I mean, I have to imagine that there has been some cases of children receiving some form of gender affirming care somehow without their permission of their parents. But are you aware of any? I mean, this is on one hand, we're getting the parents' rights are paramount when it comes to reading a book that might in school that might in any way reference a gay relationship. But the parents' rights in terms of signing off on their children getting gender affirming care seem to be completely ignored.
Absolutely. And, we've seen this a number of times, for kids, for trans youth. I am not personally aware of a single trans youth that has managed to get hormone therapy or anything like that without the permission of their parents. I'm sure it's probably happened in some place through some sort of means, but it's not something that seems, even common enough to remark on. I do know that there are some states like Washington that have medical minor laws. So these are 16-year-olds. I think in Washington, if you are 16, you can consent to medical care yourself, just like you can consent to abortions for yourself in Washington. And there are some places with local medical minor laws around if you're an emancipated minor. So there are maybe some edge cases there, but by and large, this is something that it would be almost impossible to conceive of, because knowing the number of people that have to sign on to get this care, knowing the hospital policies in all of these states, in Missouri, we saw that there was a quote unquote whistleblower around the care that Missouri hospital was providing to trans youth. And we later discovered that all of the parents who were getting the care at that clinic came out and contradicted the statements there, stating that to sign many forms stating that we agreed to the care. And so, I don't think that there are cases that are in any real means of trans youth not getting care without the permission of their parents. And that isn't what's at dispute here, because in all of these states where they're passing these laws, they are, like you said, ignoring the parental rights to dictate the care of their kids. They're ignoring the parental rights to sign on the dotted line and say that yes, I'm working with my care team, and I do want this care to happen.
Well, Erin Reed, really appreciate you coming on and catching us up on this. And I can't recommend your Substack more. We'll put a link to Erin in the Morning at majority.fm and in the podcast and YouTube description. Erin Reed, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me on today.
All right, folks, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to be talking to Joshua Landis, head of the Center for Middle East Studies at the University of Oklahoma, on U.S.-Syria policy and the implications of the Arab League normalizing their relations with Syria. We'll be right back after this. We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report. Pleasure to welcome to the program Joshua Landis. He is the Mackey Chair of the Center for Middle East Studies at the University of Oklahoma. Joshua, thanks for joining us.
It's a pleasure being with you, Sam.
Let's, can you just, before we talk about the most recent events, can you give us a sort of a timeline of how U.S. policy has evolved, devolved over the course of really a little more than a decade now in terms of Syria?
Right. Well, Syria has been, the United States and Syria have been at each other's throats for a long time. Really, it goes back to 1948 and the war, Israel's War of Independence in Palestine, in which Syria joined and supported the Palestinians and joined in opposition to Israel. And this caused relations between Syria and the United States really to go south. And it's been a bumpy ride ever since. In 2011, the major uprising against Assad started, and which turned into a civil war. And Assad hammered the opposition. Very quickly, the United States thought that Assad would fall the way that Gaddafi did and the way the Tunisian president had, and that this would be part of the Arab Spring, that democracy in the Middle East was aborting, and that they could get rid of this thorn in their side. But it didn't turn out. It didn't turn out so well.
Gaddafi fell as a function of U.S. and European bombing, I think, on some level, right? I mean,
right.
Essentially.
You're right. Yes.
And so when in 2011, I remember there was a very strong sort of like a neocon push to arm the Syrian rebellion, I guess. But what was problematic about that was being able to tell the different factions associated with that rebellion. There were some who were ostensibly pro-democracy forces, and others who were more, I guess, militant Islamist groups. And so when did we start actually like physically engaging in that conflict?
Right. President Obama was very reluctant to get America involved in the fighting, and he said in 2011 September, he said Assad should step aside. But the next sentence, which nobody remembers, was that, but America's not going to make him do it. So this was sort of a contradictory message, and it was emblematic of Obama's administration's policy towards Syria. They wanted Assad to fall. They hoped he would fall on his own as a product of this uprising, but they didn't want to get deeply involved. And that led America into many problems in the future, because already in 2012, you see Secretary of Defense saying, we don't want the Syrian army to collapse because the chemical weapons might get into the hands of Hezbollah. And then by 2013, Mike Morrell, the deputy director of the CIA, went on 60 Minutes and gave a long interview in which he said, we don't want the Syrian army to collapse or to be destroyed, because Syria might break apart, or even worse, that Islamist factions, the jihadists like Al-Qaeda, would take Damascus. And that became the major fear, that the radicals were much stronger than the liberal Syrians. They had militias on the ground. They knew how to fight. They'd had experience in Afghanistan and Iraq, and that they were going to win. So America turned really around and didn't want the army to fall. They wanted Assad to leave, but they thought the army might come to America for a deal if they weakened it enough, but they didn't want it to collapse. And Mike Morrell, the deputy director of CIA, said at the end of this interview, he said, we don't want the army to collapse, because that would be we're going to need the army to destroy Al-Qaeda when this is done. And that's the assessment of America. So America gave money to the opposition, gave arms to the opposition, wanted to weaken the Syrian army, but thought the Syrian army would come to America for a deal. And it didn't. Ultimately, the Russians stepped in 2015, and the Syrians went to the Russians. They didn't go to the Americans, which was logical because Russia was their major. And I think America actually sighed a sigh of relief when the Russians entered in. They didn't say that, of course. They clucked at their tongue at the Russians, but I think they were worried, because ISIS by that time had become the dominant Islamist faction, and it was at the doors of Damascus. And had ISIS taken Damascus, it would have been devastating for America. So I think Russia then and America had a division of labor. America decided, we're not going to worry about Assad anymore. We're just going to uniquely go after ISIS. And we dumped the Syrian Sunni opposition that we had been supporting, and we armed the Kurds. And we became partners with the Kurds, who are our proxy military and still are today. We still own 30% of Syrian territory. And we left the Russians and Assad to go after Al-Qaeda and the rest of the Syrian opposition, including those militias that we had armed and trained. And so that led to Assad winning, and it's where he is today.
And just to and to clarify too, when that shift happened, and I imagine these were, some of these were lessons from the Iraq and how we had disbanded the Ba'athist army, and that created, in some respects, it created a new enemy for both the United States within the context of Iraq and for the rest of Iraq. So when we decided to stop arming the Sunni uprising in Syria, when did we insert troops? I mean, the troop numbers, if I'm not mistaken, are somewhere a little bit below 1,000 troops.
Right. That's what we're told. And there's a lot of contractors and others. We just had the Iranian supported militia in Syria sent we don't know if it was in Iraq, actually, sent a drone and killed one American soldier, or wounded an American soldier, killed 5 contractors. So a lot of the people working there are contractors, and I assume military people as well.
And do we know the numbers of contractors that we have deployed?
We don't really. People have guessing that there's around 2,000 possibly, but there's about 1,000 American soldiers. That's usually the number that's given. And then, so it's not a lot. And we have this big Kurdish-led military, the Syrian Democratic Forces. They were named by America, needless to say, and they are staffed. The upper echelons are staffed largely by Kurds who look to America, who hope to gain, if not a great deal of autonomy, perhaps Kurdish independence. They call the region Rojava, which means Western Kurdistan, and they're America's their protector. And the moment America leaves, they will have to make a deal with Assad, who will eliminate their independent militia and bring them back under state control. And that's what they're worried about.
Okay, and so that's about 30% of the territory up in the Northeast that
Yes.
we are helping the Kurds essentially maintain there. So
yes, and it's got most of the oil. It's got most of Syria's oil, which we raised the Syrian army, and with these Russian soldiers as well. They were militiamen. They weren't part of the Russian army, and we killed about 200 Russians in a race for these oil wells. And America got them as ISIS, which owned them at the time, was collapsing. Everybody was trying to get the oil because they knew that was going to be key to sustaining the future of Syria. America got it, and that's what largely funds the Kurdish military in the Northeast. So it's not that much money for America to remain there.
So in 2020, the Trump administration imposed the Caesar sanctions. Is that right?
Right.
Will you
Correct.
explain what those sanctions are and give me your sense of, I guess we can start to talk about those sanctions in the context of what's happening with the Arab League as well.
Absolutely. And there's a bill, House Resolution 3202, is sitting in front of Congress for a vote, maybe voted on this coming week, which doubles down on those Caesar sanctions. So it's very important. This is at play now in Washington. The Caesar sanctions were designed to put sanctions, make it much easier to sanction people in Syria, and to impose secondary sanctions. That means sanctions on any person or entity, firm that invested in Syrian reconstruction, in oil, energy sector. So a number of sectors of Syria were named and designated in order to keep Syria from rebuilding. The idea was that Assad would stay weak, the state would stay weak, and Syria would remain in ruins, which would make it a liability for Iran and particularly Russia. So America wanted to punish the supporters of Assad and keep the state very weak, which is what the Caesar sanctions are designed to do. And for the last 5 years, they came in 2019-20, and the Syrian currency collapsed. It's had a devastating effect on the economy. Now, of course, the war has had a bad effect. The collapse of the Lebanese economy has had an effect. There are numerous factors that have caused this downward spiral of the Syrian economy. But the currency was really hammered by this. It had partially collapsed during the war, but it was really once the Caesar sanctions were imposed and Lebanon's economy collapsed. And that devastated Syrians. 90% of Syrians today are living in poverty. Many are malnourished. The UN says it's a disaster. There's a lot of stunted growth amongst children in Syria because they're not getting the right food. And this, ruins their brains and is going to have lifelong effects on this generation of Syrians. So, yeah, the Caesar sanctions are only partially responsible for that. But we saw the Arab states just this past month.
Well, before we get to that, I want to because what are the rational? I mean, the idea that the U.S. government is not concerned about the suffering of the Syrian people is not a hard concept for me to grasp, frankly.
Well, it is concerned, and we are the largest single donor of humanitarian aid. But the argument
to Syria. Okay, yeah. I mean, so we're causing the suffering. We're ostensibly trying to alleviate it to some extent, but what we're not allowing Syrian society to do is to rebuild an economy and a civil society that can function to provide for its own people going forward. But
Absolutely.
What is
it's like walking past a homeless person on the street and you give him some money out of your pocket, which is humanitarian aid. But what he really needs is to get a house, a telephone, and ultimately be able to find a job. And those are the things that Syrians want to do. They want to be able to get back on their feet and rebuild their houses and rebuild their lives. And today they can't. And there's no electricity. There's like 2 hours electricity a day in most Syrian homes.
But we're
freezing this winter.
What is the end game? Like, what is the goal of sanctions like that? It seems that the United States accepts the fact that Assad is not leaving for power. I mean, if there was a civil war where hundreds of thousands of people died, and it was not enough to drive him out of power, what are these sanctions supposed to achieve? Like, what is the end game of just inhibiting the ability of Syria to become a country that can sustain itself?
You know, that's a super good question, Sam. And I don't know the real answer to it, because it just becomes this negative policy. Unfortunately, now, officially, America says that it supports UN resolution 54002. I'm forgetting what the numbers now are, but it's a Syrian resolution a UN resolution that was passed in 2016-15 that says that Syria should have a political solution to the civil war, that there should be free elections overseen by the UN, in which the opposition would be able to, come to power, which is regime change, if you want, through legal means. And that's what America supports. So in other words, this leverage and sanctions are theoretically to produce this democratic outcome. But of course, we know that Assad has won. He's fought 12 years of civil war in order not to have a democratic outcome, and he's won the war. And now, the Arab world, I think, understands this, and they want to move on and normalize. And the United States is digging its heels, and that's why there's this resolution, House Resolution 3202, which is before the House this week. It's been passed through the House Foreign Relations Committee with both Democrats and Republicans supporting it, which doubles down on the Caesar sanctions and says that anybody who invests in Syria, that not only will they be sanctioned, but America has to set up all of these oversight committees that will monitor every investment transaction in Syria, and anything that violates Caesar, that America will alert the Congress every year to who's investing in Syria so they can sanction them. And this means that the Saudis and the others who are trying to normalize with Syria are going to be at loggerheads with America. And it puts us in an inimical stance to our closest allies. Anthony Lake was just in Saudi Arabia trying to reassure the Saudis that we're on their side. But here we are, going to hammer them on their Syria policy. And that means the Saudis are going to, what does that do? It forces them towards China. It forces them towards looking for other countries, perhaps even Iran, to help them drive out the Americans and get sanctions lifted. I mean, it's a bad situation.
I'm not as, I guess, I don't know how horribly concerned I would be to be alienated from Saudi Arabia, frankly. But within this context, I guess I'm just trying to figure out what the United States motivations are, because clearly Washington doesn't want to be alienated from Saudi Arabia. So what is the end game we want to have some control over that oil, and so we'll rescind the sanctions so that you can rebuild your country, but we get to maintain the control over those oil fields in the Northwest. Is that enough of a it's hard to figure out the agenda, right?
The agenda is we're punishing Russia. The Ukraine war made it much more difficult to leave. Iran, daggers drawn with Iran over this nuclear enrichment. So we don't really want to give them a pass in Syria. Secondly, Biden withdrew from Afghanistan. He got a bloody nose for that. I think it was the right thing to do, but it was done sloppily, and everybody misunderstood Afghanistan so severely they didn't realize the Taliban was going to take over so quickly. And so it was a mess. He got a bloody nose, and I think he just decided, I'm not going to pull us out of Syria, even though Trump had tried, because we have this relationship with the Kurds. It's going to be another thump as America leaves these endless wars. And I think he's just kicking a can down the road. So there's that element. So that's what I think is happening is America now under Biden does not have a special envoy to Syria. It really has, it's not worried about Syria. I think it's just doing damage control there. Because if we really were to pull out and leave with our troops, the whole infrastructure of this 30% of Syria would be taken over by the Syrian army. And the leaders that we've cultivated and promised to defend would be out on their ear. Some of them would be put into the clink, others would be killed, but they would have to flee the country like the Afghans we supported. Of course, Afghanistan was a much bigger operation. There was thousands more people dependent on us, but still there are quite a few people dependent on us in northeast Syria.
And so, is that basically it? We're just going to try and essentially tread water in Syria, provide this humanitarian aid as some type of band-aid on a massive wound, I guess, that really we're inhibiting from healing. Right. I mean, that's sort of the way it is. It is maybe not totally responsible, but we're certainly inhibiting the healing of this. And ostensibly, is this punishment that we are giving Russia and Iran? We're denying them the commerce that could be associated with their ally, Russian construction company contracts and Iranian. I don't know, sales. I mean, is that theoretically what it is? It's like we're trying to, it's just the economic knock-on effects of not having the opportunities in Syria that they would have.
Right. We don't want to say we've lost. And that's, I was just on a panel with Jim Jeffrey, who was a special envoy under Trump. He would have been ambassador to Turkey. He's a longtime State Department, but he had really articulated our policy. And he said, in 2020 or 19, he said, my task is to turn Syria into a quagmire for Russia and Iran. And he's, he articulated just this last week, he articulated it as, we don't want to allow the Assad regime to reassemble itself and to restabilize itself. We're denying them this ability to do this. And that's what's important. We're not keeping Assad from his shrimp dinners or his palaces, but we are keeping the state weak. And I think that's just, that's the extent of it at this point. I suppose some people hope that there will be democracy coming out the other end, but it's not going to happen.
But isn't that also sort of a dangerous thing to do on some level in
it is
that region?
The Jordanian foreign minister, just before the normalization of Syria with the Arab League, he was out there on the stump speech, and he said, the status quo is not working. It's immiserating the Syrian people. It's causing more refugees to leave the country, which of course are going to places like Jordan and Lebanon. They don't want that. Assad has turned to a drug trade. The Captagon trade, which is amphetamine, is being produced in Syria's drug factories, which used to be the sort of gold standard of Syrian industry, which was the drug industry, which it did very well and it produced cheap drugs. But that got largely destroyed during the war. But the know-how is there, and it's turned to illegal drugs, which are flowing out of Syria. And so the Jordanians say, well, look, we've got to stop that drug trade. We've got to diminish the role of the Iranians and return refugees. The only way we're going to do any of that is by getting rid of sanctions, reestablishing some relations, diplomacy, and rebuilding Syria. And let Syrians, these people who have been traumatized by this war, rebuild their lives. And then, perhaps legitimate trade will be, we can use that as a negotiating tool to end the illegitimate drug trade. You're not going to get rid of Assad, and Assad's here to stay. That's what they all say. Assad's here to stay. We got to stop thinking about regime change, and we have to do the best we can. And the status quo is not working. It's making things worse. And I think that's the agreed attitude by the Arabs.
And it sounds as if the Arab League deciding to normalize relations with Syria is not really going to have any necessarily substantial material impact on Syrian society, because they are all afraid of these secondary sanctions from the U.S.
Yes.
And it also sounds as if the Biden administration is not interested in really engaging in doing anything other than sort of treading water there, and that this move by the Arab League will not in any way sort of like pressure the Biden administration enough to change their policy.
I think you're correct. I think there are people in the Biden administration that would like to have the liberty to explore, see how the Arabs do with diplomacy. But Congress, look at Assad as in Congress, you can't sell that. And there are lots of groups in Congress that want their congressmen to double down on these sanctions. And Congress is moving forward with this bill. I think the administration would like it not to happen, but they're not going to fight for Assad. That's for sure.
You don't think they would ever veto a bill like that? Do you think it has the ability?
I don't think so.
Well, yeah. It sounds pretty bleak, and we're just basically waiting for a crisis that is significant enough that it causes us to change our policy.
Well, and that almost happened during the earthquake that took place in southern Turkey, northern Syria. The U.S. immediately, almost within 2 days of the earthquake, said we're lifting sanctions for 6 months. That in August that will come to an end. Now, Saudi Arabia has come. It's been reported in a few newspapers, has come to the United States and saying, "Would you lift sanctions for another year in order so that we can continue to send aid and help Syria get back on its feet?" And that's the kind of negotiation that's going on between the White House and the Arab League and Saudi Arabia. That's why this bill is being passed through Congress, because there are opponents of it who are trying to stop it through Congress. Because I think the administration would throw it on the table to Saudi Arabia as we negotiate over things like, oil production and
right.
Abraham Accords and other things that are much more important to the White House than Syria. But Congress is trying to make sure, that doesn't happen.
When we say Congress, I mean, who are we talking about? If this bill gets to the floor and gets a vote, is it going to get 500 votes or 435 votes rather? Or...
I think it's going to get a lot. It's the name of the bill. I'm forgetting the name, but it's like the anti-Assad bill. So it's bringing justice to Assad type bill, and that's the way it's being framed. And it's not going to bring justice to Assad. It's not going to hurt Assad. It will hurt the Syrian people. Of course, it hurts Assad in his ability to reconstruct and to rebuild his state. That's true. But that's the, it's popular red meat for an American, because Assad stands for everything that America hates. A one-party state, a Ba'athist state. He's a minority religion on top of Syria. He's an enemy of Israel. He supports Hezbollah. There's a long, he's an Iranian client, if you will. There's a long checklist of things that we don't like about him.
Well, Joshua Landis, Mackey Chair of the Center for Middle East Studies at the University of Oklahoma. Thanks for you spelling this out for us. It seems a little bit bleak, and I guess we'll keep an eye on that bill in Congress to see if it passes. I imagine that there are Syrian civilians who are, hoping that it doesn't, to the extent that they're aware of this. But it's sort of shocking that we didn't learn the first lesson from sanctions in terms of Iraq 30 years ago, I guess now. But
Right.
Appreciate your joining us.
Well, it's a pleasure being with you, Sam. Thank you. Thank you for such good questions. You've done your homework. No doubt about it.
Thank you.
You've been following this.
We have a little bit. All right. Well, thank you very much. All right. We're going to have to take a quick break, folks. Head into the fun half of the program, wherein we will have fun. That was sort of depressing. Oh, boy. We got to have like a fun first hour guest, or even like a moderately not. But
we'll cover all the fun news that's happening.
Bring a clown on.
Yeah. We got to bring somebody on to I don't know, who's writing like a biography of Chris Christie or something funny. I don't know. Drew from Vegas says, I decided to listen to on the app today. I got to say, Feldman's commitment to being a professor of Middle East studies was his most impressive bit yet. Folks, it's your support that makes this show possible. You can become a member at jointhemajorityreport.com. When you do, you not only get the free show free of commercials, but you get the fun half. And you help the show survive and thrive. We had a sponsor today. I just want to say, these toothpicks are to get you to quit smoking. The nicotine toothpicks. I saw somebody who was upset on it helped me quit smoking years ago.
It's not a gateway into the nicotine.
No. And I would not. I mean, there's a reason why I don't use the nicotine toothpicks. Is because I don't want to reignite my addiction to nicotine. But if you're smoking or you're vaping, this is a mechanism in which to get off of that. And then over time, it becomes a lot easier to transition to just, the caffeine B6 or just, standard toothpicks or whatever. This is a mechanism in which to get away from smoking. I just want to reiterate that. What else? Oh, justcoffee.coop. Fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code. Get 10% off. Get the Majority Report blend if you want. It's pretty good. Also, what's happening on ESVN?
We had an episode on Monday. We discussed a little bit about the NBA, beginning of the NBA Finals, the Stanley Cup Final as well. And we discussed a little bit of the Dalvin Cook's contract situation in Minnesota, as well as some of the controversy surrounding Churchill Downs and horse racing with all the horses that have unfortunately died there. So youtube.com/ESVN show for more. We will be back next Monday as well to keep covering the two finals series that are going on, as well as the big golf merger between PGA and LIV and all of the political and geopolitical implications of that as well.
Matt.
Last night on Left Reckoning, Alex Hockley, we talked about the end of left populism and this weird space we're in now. We also had Gene Bajalan on to talk about Turkey, and in the post game, which we gave away for free for everybody, but patreon.com/Left Reckoning. Ben Burgess and Gene and David and I talked about Cornel West's entry into the presidential race, and we also talked about if Chick-fil-A is the Lord's chicken or if it's woke chicken. Turns out it's woke chicken.
Woke chicken.
So we got Chick-fil-A back on our team now.
Yeah. And we did a video the other day of a bot.
Oh yeah, Matt, were you at? I was at Monday, the one you put in about that TPUSA woman who was like, Chick-fil-A, you were not God's chicken anymore.
Yes, that's the woman. Yeah, yeah.
You were the woke chicken.
And she's going to, what is it, Craze or something like that?
Yeah, she went to Raising Cane's instead.
Raising Cane's, which apparently is very supportive of LGBTQ. That's my understanding. I'm not sure if that's true.
Owned by Panda Express, the company that owned the overriding company of Panda Express, a Chinese national who owns the company, and also, as someone said in the IMs, a very supportive Pride Month.
Sorry, but
company.
what's funny about that video is, like, one, she says that BlackRock funds their chicken.
Yes, right.
And it's like, okay, BlackRock has a relationship with Tyson Foods. Like, Tyson does child labor. It's probably the biggest, one of the biggest factory farmers. So like, and okay, not that she'd care about that stuff, but also a very close relationship with the Clinton family. So like, you probably, if you cared about the woke chicken, the Tyson, it's just funny that BlackRock becomes this sort of totemic thing for them. It's like, I don't know, very strange.
It's very strange.
The woke chicken.
I'm going to take a quick break. 646-257-3920 is the number. We'll turn on the phones in a bit. See you in the fun half. Left is best. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
You know, I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous? You're a little bit upset? You're riled up?
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude. You want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
That's some good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501-457. 2, 38, 56, 27. 1/2. 5 eighths. 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy!
Dance, dance, dance. Rand Paul. I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're nothing.
Excuse me? Fuck you, you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.